Joining us now in studio is British political commentator and Middle East expert Tom Gross. Thank you for coming in, Tom.
Good morning.
So we're hearing these reports about Tony Blair in Israeli media, and how likely is it that they're true and that Tony Blair could indeed play a role in the day after in Gaza?
Well, I have no confirmation of the reports, but they do make sense in the sense that somebody is going to have to oversee the rebuilding of Gaza afterwards. Obviously, billions and billions of dollars are going to be spent rebuilding large parts of Gaza, possibly aid from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And what we need is somebody like Tony Blair, who has a lot of experience in the region. He was, to remind people, the Middle East peace envoy for about 6 years after he was British Prime Minister for 3 consecutive terms. So he enjoys fairly good relations with both Israelis and with Arab countries, not, I have to say, with those people who supported the former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, because, of course, he helped in the invasion of Iraq. And Blair is relatively young. He's 70 years old, and he doesn't have a full-time job. So you can't have someone like Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, doing such a thing, because whoever does this needs to devote himself 100% of the time. It's going to be a massive task to rebuild Gaza, and you need someone quite firm. So Blair, although he was the Labour Party Prime Minister, is a kind of centrist figure that bridges left and right. He enjoys relatively good relations with the Israeli government. He's not hostile to the government like one of his successors as Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was. And he also has been tough in the sense that he's taken military action, for example, in Kosovo, Sierra Leone, and more controversially in Afghanistan and Iraq. But he's also been a peacemaker in Northern Ireland. He helped bridge the Protestant-Catholic divide, and he has a wealth of international experience. And what you don't want is corruption again. You don't want hundreds of billions or tens of billions going into Gaza, and it either going to be used by Islamist militants regrouping in terror tunnels, or by corrupt, more secular Fatah-type Palestinian officials, which is one reason why Hamas gained sympathy and support among Gazans in the first place. The incredible corruption of Yasser Arafat and his entourage in Gaza is why Hamas got support in the first place. So you need someone quite tough like Blair. So in a way, he would be a good choice, I think.
Now, his spokesperson denied it, denied those allegations or those reports.
Well, no. Interestingly, his spokesperson didn't deny that he'd been in Israel and met Netanyahu. What his spokesperson denied is the specific allegation that some Gazan refugees may be resettled in other countries temporarily before returning to Gaza as it's rebuilt. And he certainly doesn't want to put his name to that at this point. But he didn't deny being involved in a rebuilding effort in Gaza in general. It was a question of whether they would move Palestinian populations out of Gaza. That part he denied.
Right. Now, if not Blair, is there another personality or even a nation that you believe should or could step up to assist in resolving the situation in the day after in Gaza?
Well, it's an incredibly difficult Herculean task by anybody. Yeah. And there would be some kind of historic irony that it would be a former British Prime Minister, because many people say that Britain, under the British mandate, didn't resolve a two-state solution way back then, and part of the reason we still have such problems in this part of the world is to do with British diplomacy. So in a way it would circle us, or whatever. Ironic. It would be historic circling of an issue were a former British Prime Minister to be a key figure. Look, I don't think Blair's perfect. A lot of people don't like him because he was involved in the invasion of Iraq alongside George W. Bush. However, I'm not sure who else there is. I mean, Blair is very involved. He knows, for example, Salam Fayyad, the former Palestinian Prime Minister, probably the only Palestinian leader who has tried to do state building in Palestinian territories rather than just commit jihad and attacks. You know, Fayyad was the former Palestinian Prime Minister. He tried to root out corruption. He had been an official in the World Bank in Washington and the IMF. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Texas. And someone like that working with Blair is a more moderate and less corrupt figure than a lot of other people in Palestinian politics, let's say.
Right. Now, we're seeing a lot of criticism of Israel worldwide. We're seeing a denial of atrocities which were perpetrated against Israeli civilians in one of the most documented conflicts, or in the most documented events in history, and even blatant hatred expressed towards Jews and towards Israelis. At this point, how do you feel the public in the West is viewing this conflict?
Well, yes, there's a segment of the public that's on fire. I mean, to be generous, we'll just say they care a lot about Palestinians. To be less generous, I'd say they're motivated because it's Israelis and Jews and the world's only Jewish state that is fighting with Hamas. And we have disruptions all over the place. So just a few days ago, for example, in Lower Manhattan at the site of the 9/11 terror attacks, World Trade Center, we have people chanting for the end of Israel. And of course, this was one of the aims of Al-Qaeda, the terror group that carried out the 9/11 attacks. We have things like the Milan Opera House in Italy, a disruption of a Christmas performance a few days ago. We have railway stations being shut down by protesters in major American cities, also in British cities. We have the Los Angeles freeway being disrupted. But having said that, I think there's a large silent majority that absolutely do not like their lives being disrupted, do not like people screaming and shouting extremist slogans on behalf of a conflict far away that has nothing directly impacting people in America or Europe. And I think that although the opinion against Israel is very vociferous, there's probably a large silent majority that quietly sympathizes with Israel. They know perfectly well what happened on October 7th. Some of the voices shouting denial tend to be the usual suspects, some far leftist journalists like Owen Jones, of the columnist for the British Guardian, who's kind of muddying the waters if people were really raped or something on October 7th. He's sowing doubt on it, but he's been condemned by other journalists in Britain for sowing such doubts. And I think that, the people shouting loudest make a lot of protest, but that doesn't mean that a big swathe of the population agrees with them. My sense is they don't, actually, and we just, they don't go out and demonstrate for Israel, but they certainly don't sympathize with kind of de facto pro-Hamas demonstrators. And in fact, electorally, we see elections like we just had in the Netherlands. Geert Wilders, who is a kind of anti-Muslim candidate, or he would say he's just a pro-democracy candidate, he scored 37% in the Dutch elections. So I think that's a sign of things to come in general in Western democracies. People don't want their streets and railway stations and sacred symbols like the cenotaph in Britain, or the War Memorial, or the site of the World Trade Center in America. They don't want them disrupted by people screaming anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic or pro-terrorist slogans.
Right, and it's certainly disrupting the Christmas holiday period in many of these major cities. Now, you mentioned elections. Both the U.S. and the U.K. have general elections this year. Will the Middle East be an issue in these elections for them?
Well, I don't think it will be directly. Obviously, most elections are more about domestic issues and economic issues. Having said that, I think that as I just mentioned with the Geert Wilders point, I think the average person in England doesn't want the centre of London closed down Saturday after Saturday by people waving Palestinian flags and screaming all kinds of extremist chants. And I suspect that in this sense, it plays into some of the feeling that there's too much migration, particularly illegal migration, particularly from certain Muslim countries, I don't know, in Southeast Asia or the Arab world or North Africa, coming into Europe or indeed into the United States. And there's a feeling that if people want to come and live in America or Britain, they should integrate. And in fact, we see, for example, Hindus integrating very well in Britain. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is of Indian Hindu origin, and so are some other members in the cabinet. What I don't think people in Britain want is people wrapping themselves up in keffiyeh and screaming, chanting in Arabic. So they won't vote specifically on Israel-Palestine, but the migration factor, which is linked to that, may play into the votes in both the United States and Britain this year. Yes, I think so.
Very interesting. Tom Gross, thank you very much for this input and for coming in.
Thank you.